German-speaking regions a couple of years ago. And it was actually a fiction. Just a fictitious thriller. Just a story. At least that's what Marc thought. It was a well-researched story. And it turned out that it changed the discussion about critical infrastructures totally. So just because of this book, conferences were initiated to discuss protection of critical infrastructures. And imagine, some parts of the German government have their guys reading this book for men as mandatory. And it's one of the few occasions where the German government said, okay, there's an Austrian and you better learn something from him. So please welcome on stage Mr. Marc Elsberg and enjoy getting paranoid and scared and whatever you want.
Imagine a nice dinner at home with friends, and suddenly lights go out. The radio falls silent. There's some ah and oh, but you know the power will be back on any second. You chat along while waiting for light and power to return. And after a few seconds, some of you might go to the fuse box, check the cutout switch. Others will look out the window to find out whether you are the only ones without power. Some might switch on the flashlight function of your mobile phones to get some light, while others go looking for some candles and matches. You use the opportunity to visit the restroom, but after you have flushed, you miss the familiar sound of water refilling the water tank. Now you're pissed, literally. But still you're not worried, since power will be back on any second for sure. And even if it stayed out for some more minutes, or even an hour, you don't care. Some summers you went camping, you know how to cope without modern life's comforts for a while. You will make the best of the situation and continue with a romantic candlelight dinner. Well, only the sanitary situation might constitute some inconvenience rather sooner than later. An inspired conversation might even start speculating about the spooky consequences of power supply failing for the whole night or even the next day. Speculations feel even more comfortably creepy since you still expect power to come back on any second. After an hour or so and another disgusting visit to the toilet, you decide to get some more information. Unfortunately, you discover your mobile network doesn't work properly. There is no connection to the internet. And of course, since the Wi-Fi router depends on power, also your laptop no longer works. You connect the computer with a cable directly to the socket. No connection. If you still use a landline for a telephone and pick it up, you won't hear the dial tone. The line is as dead as your internet connection and your mobile network. Now you do not even bother to try TV, but you want some news. You start looking for a battery-powered radio. Hands up, who would have at home a battery-powered radio? That's poor, but it's the average 10 to 20%. Well, the room starts cooling down since heating neither works. Your guests leave, and the same you do to the dishes, since without water you can't wash anyway. Probably you do not even think about the remaining food in the fridge, which of course no longer is cooling. And the food starts decaying, but you go to bed and know when you'll wake up, Tomorrow morning everything will be okay anyway. But when you do wake up the next morning, there still is no electricity. A couple of years ago, I started thinking about writing a new thriller. I didn't want to send 6 serial killer number 30,000 into the literary landscape, hunted by an investigator which is almost as crazy as the killer. And one day I stumbled upon an article describing the manufacturing of an electric toothbrush in today's globalized world. Bristles coming from one country, the battery from a different one. There were parts from more than a dozen countries, shipped to and assembled in another, before the finished product is distributed into world markets. Of course, I had been aware of international integrated just-in-time production processes growing during the last decades, though I connected them more to larger products like cars or washing machines. But if you think about it, why not an electric toothbrush? When even meat is transported all over Europe before you get it on your table. I still was considering a conventional thriller, say criminals sabotaging such a production chain and blackmailing the company. Conveniently, in today's world, for this you do not even have to throw a bomb into Shanghai harbor. As you here especially are aware today, you simply place a digital bomb in one of the harbor's automatic control systems. And you do this from your laptop at home. I realized something had changed fundamentally, the ways we organize our society. This, I thought, was a much more intriguing story to tell. But I faced several major challenges. First, the subject is vast. It includes every part of our life. Second, how to tell about something people are not even aware of. Well, luckily, during my looking into things, I had discovered I basically were thinking about structure, infrastructure, including critical infrastructure, as it is called. During the process, I had realized there are several infrastructures being fundamental to all others. Logistics, finance, information, and notably electricity. But even logistics, finance, and information technologies need power. Even more as today, and here's one important link to this event here, these infrastructures by now entirely depend on trillions of small electronic devices and structures and software built into them everywhere. So, to tell my story, I could somehow write about electric power, which presented the next challenge. In developed countries, electric power is a commodity. It comes from a hole in the wall, almost naturally, so we do not spare thought of it. During research, I had found reports about large power outages, and then I knew I will write about a large blackout, covering the Western world for several days, if not weeks. And this would people make aware of the importance of electricity, and through this, of the structural and systemic changes that took place in our societies. Why this can happen at all in the first place, you have to understand how the modern power grid works. In an early scene of blackout, I used the analogy of the human body's blood circulation to explain it to some non-professionals. Maybe I just quote a little bit of this scene. The only difference being that there's not just one, but several hearts at work. Those are the power plants. From the power plants, the energy is distributed throughout the country like the blood in the body. And there are various wires and cables, like just as the body has various veins and arteries, high voltage wires can be compared to the main arteries that transport large quantities over long distances. Middle voltage wires carry the electricity further onto the regional networks, which then distributed to the individual customers like the capillaries that carry blood to the individual cells. Now, two factors are decisive here. First, in order to keep the grid stable, it has to maintain a constant frequency. In Europe, this is largely 50 Hertz. You could compare that with the blood pressure of a human. If it gets too high or too low, we keel over. That's what happens in a blackout. That brings me to the second point. Currently, it is next to impossible to store vast amounts of electricity. That's why it has to keep flowing, like blood. And that means that it has to be produced when it's going to be used. Now, these are various quantities over the course of the day, just as the heart beats more rapidly when you are running than when you are at rest. The power plants have to deliver more energy when the demand peaks, or additional power plants have to be turned on to supply more power. Europe's electrical grids are intricately linked with each other. Although there are still kind of national and local energy producers, these days the electricity flows from the one end of Europe to the other. It goes wherever it's needed. Today's privatized markets are organized by energy producers, grid operators, and energy exchange markets, where the energy producers and retailers negotiate their prices. And then, of course, there's politics. So today, providing energy involves many diverse actors and agencies who have to coordinate their actions with each other. And the first priority, of course, is not the optimal delivery of energy to the population and to the industries, but rather the creation of profit for themselves. So there are many competing interests at play here that have to be reconciled with one another in the case of a crisis, and preferably within minutes. If you think a blackout like this couldn't happen, just remember some smaller past ones. When I started my research, they hadn't been so long ago. For example, in 2003, the entire US East Coast fell black. The same year, a minor human mistake in Switzerland caused the then poorly organized Italian grid to collapse, plunging the country into a 24-hour blackout. There are famous pictures of Europe at night. You know these pictures from space where you see the world, and there's Europe at night, all the bright lights everywhere, and Italy is missing, completely missing. There's no Italy there at all. And this was due to one single event, a tree crashing on the line in Switzerland, not even in Italy. In 2006, the passage of a cruise liner in northern Germany from its inland dockyard to the sea required the temporary shutdown of a power line it was crossing, because these cruise liners are so big that they almost touch the lines. The action was not well coordinated, and neighboring lines were overburdened within seconds. Humans cannot react quick enough, so control system software stepped in and shut down the neighboring lines automatically, which multiplied the effect into all the next neighboring lines and spread it through a domino effect into the whole European system, like an epidemic. It took just 15 minutes to put several million people from Germany down to Spain into an hour-long partial blackout, quarter of an hour from northern Germany down to Spain. Most experts today say at this moment Europe scraped past a much more severe situation. So, after reading this, I knew my planned scenario would not be complete fantasy. But it doesn't matter anyway, because supermarkets depend on electronic warehouse systems. Without them, the employees will no longer know which products are still in stock. Cooling and freezing systems stop. Electronic cash points, beep, don't work. Neither do bank or credit cards. Air conditioning electronic door openers, etc. don't work. Most employees don't get to their workplace because their car tanks are empty and public transport stopped. Therefore, in such situations, employees have orders to close the shop and keep it closed. But let's return to the beginning of this chain once more. Especially in industrial farming, we face a catastrophe which we can no longer stop, even if we wanted. As we've learned already, they only run on automated air conditioning, feeding, and cleaning systems. Within a few hours after these systems fail, the animals suffocate. They die from lack of air. And if not, they starve or die from overly filled and inflamed udders, oiter. As I mentioned already, water supply depends on the grid, at least mostly. I mean, there are some cities who have some reserves, but usually they depend on the grid. Remember the toilet. And imagine a big city with skyscrapers. By the way, skyscrapers. When the city of Berlin ran through the scenario, theoretical, one finding was that the last people stuck in elevators would be saved after 3 days. 3 days in an elevator with strangers. What an experience. If you survive it. Also, the Berlin study discovered the average food stock of a household lasts 4 days. But countries hold strategic stock of food and fuel, you might interject. Germany or Austria, for example, for 3 months. That is right, but as we have seen, without gas stations working and grounded electric trains blocking railways, you won't be able to distribute it over the country. As we've heard, communication will be down entirely, almost immediately. At an event, for example, 1.5 years ago in Dresden, which I attended, one representative of one of the major German mobile networks explained that they would last for 30 minutes. Though battery power for the Funkmasten, for the sending stations, would last for 3 to 4 hours, but due to the complexity of the rest of the system, there would no mobile network after just half an hour, after the beginning of the blackout. Developments like the coming Internet of Everything will raise these interdependencies and complexity to new heights and even start to invade our bodies. So don't misinterpret me, I'm not deluded at all. Quite the contrary, you see I don't read from a book but from an electronic device. I love all that comfort and progress. But visions of the future, like smart grids, but also smart houses, smart cities, and so on, and the future developed societies at all largely rely upon the optimized management of complex systems. And it is electronic management. It doesn't get easier by the fact that the more complex a system is, the more unexpected failures it produces. And on that we missed out during this evolution of the last 3 decades. This was security. Not only security of single parts of the system, but of the system in general and of its subsystems. The technical term would be security by design. In the future it will be key to consider how to best provide security from the single device up to the whole global system. By the way, we are not just talking about energy supply and information technology systems, but any complex social, political, economic, and environmental system, which, of course, leads us far beyond technology and deep into society and politics. And yes, security demands investing money. But as one character in the book rightly claims, lack of security eventually will cost you a multiple. For example, one main reason for large-scale systemic insecurity is the tendency to use standardized components throughout the whole system, which makes sense from an economic point of view. On the other hand, it establishes a major threat to security since Through this way, small incidents easily infect the whole systems. It is like a monoculture in agriculture, where a single bug can destroy an entire region's or even country's harvest. But standardization is just one security threat. So our goal must be to make the system sustainable and resilient and available to as many people as possible. As we've heard, a lot of aspects contribute to our societies and companies' security: social, political, environmental, financial, technological, and more. But in our digitalized world, probably IT security is more important than ever and might be now the first line of defense for our systems. Actually, I do have food and water for 2 weeks, which is less than you might think. As recommended by several national institutions, in my rented apartment, a power generator wouldn't make much sense. But during my research, I talked to the security chief of a large energy provider. Proudly, he told me about a bunker from the times of Cold War beneath his house, stuffed with water and food for 2 months, plus weapon and ammunition. Because you'll get some guests you didn't invite when you're quite prepared. Well, I don't know whether he stores this stuff because of his position at an energy provider, or if he chose his job because he just loves to have some weapons around. Anyhow, I never want to get into such a dilemma. When I started research, I realized I pursued a typical urban shopping habit, buying for the next 2 days maybe. My water reserves wouldn't have lasted for 2 days if I also needed to flush the toilet, not even a day. But I also realized I could easily manage the 2 weeks, which I feature in the book, with my wine reservoir. Well, which would be the far more pleasant condition anyway. Well, and wine might be the proper keyword to thank you all for your attention and wish you an interesting and inspiring lasting day and evening with a good glass of wine or beer or whatever. Thank you.